Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel, where today I am going to be ranking the Thorpe Park roller coasters. So, ranking the Thorpe Park roller coasters. So, as you may remember, I did a ranking the Alton Towers roller coasters video back towards the beginning of October, and then lockdown has kind of hit us, and I was trying to think of content to keep some regular stuff coming up on the channel, and I thought I would follow up my previous video with another installment, but this time ranking the Thorpe Park roller coasters. So before I get stuck in, I just thought I would put in a few disclaimers at the beginning just to get them out the way. So, of course, this is my own personal opinions on the coasters at Thorpe Park. So no hate towards anyone. This is just what I personally prefer as a coaster enthusiast, and where I would rank the coasters myself. Obviously, we all enjoy different elements and different coaster experiences, so not everyone agrees, but you know what? That's fine. That's the beauty, is you're not always going to agree on everything, and I think if everyone agreed, it would be kind of boring, because you wouldn't have many discussions or debates about the differences and why you prefer something and why someone else doesn't really rate it that highly. I am also including different variations of a certain coaster that lies at Thorpe. Avid Thorpe Park goers, you may know which coaster I'm on about, and by variation I mean it's changed theme and the whole experience of the ride is completely different. So for that, obviously it's exactly the same coaster layout, I just may rate the overall experience slightly higher or slightly lower depending on the theme. But with the disclaimers and the boring bit out the way, let's get stuck in. In at number 9 is the Flying Fish. Again, I think this is a brilliant first coaster for younger thrill seekers, as it's just your very standard powered coaster layout, kind of the figure of 8 background. It's not my favourite Mack powered coaster I've been on. I certainly rate the likes of the Runaway Mine Train at Alton Towers and Scorpion Express at Chessington and Rhombus Rocket at Fantasy Island a lot higher than Flying Fish at Thorpe. It's still an enjoyable coaster, especially when you're with friends and you can do a kind of takeover in a big group. Obviously not at the moment with COVID restrictions and with the parks now being shut. When all the restrictions are over, it's a great ride to do in a group of friends, especially if you know the ride hoppers. They sometimes let you have a few extra bonus laps of the coaster, as normally it's a 2 or 3 lap special. Also, there is a hideous jolt on the Flying Fish that's kind of comes completely out of nowhere and you're not expecting it, and the jolt is very, very uncomfortable. Also, there's not really much theming around the ride. Like, the train design obviously is a fish and that's pretty impressive, but I think there used to be ponds or something underneath the ride, but they've just kind of all overgrown, dried up, so it'd be nice to maybe see them restored back to their full potential. Maybe they weren't fountains or ponds before, but that's what it looks like off ride, and it would certainly make more sense to have that kind of water underneath the coaster with the theme of it being a fish. But do comment down below if I'm wrong or if you know anything more about that. But yeah, that is Flying Fish and why it's in at number 9. Next up at number 8, we have X No Way Out. This is a bit of a throwback for those of you who have visited in recent years. For your first visit, you may not remember this, but this was actually the first roller coaster I ever did at Thorpe Park. I was part of a guide unit when I was a lot younger, and we went to Thorpe Park as one of our kind of trips we did yearly, and we went for Fright Nights, and none of us did any mazes. All of us, believe it or not, especially with me, didn't really want to do any of the big coasters, so we started ourselves off with X No Way Out. This was a really unique ride experience, and I only did it once or twice, which is why it's quite low, as I didn't get to do it as many times as I would have liked to have given it like a full kind of thought into it. Also, it was so many years ago, I'm kind of struggling to remember parts of it, but the main thing was it was in the dark and you went backwards. And I remember looking at the height of the pyramid, you kind of realise the height of this coaster, but obviously when you're in the dark and you're indoors and you're going backwards, it's so disorientating. But that first drop as you come off of the first lift hill going backwards is ridiculously fun. Like, it's so strange, it's really good fun, and I just remember really enjoying the experience. Obviously it's very dark, disorientating, you kind of lose all sense of direction on the coaster when it's going backwards indoors, I find. And there wasn't really much around the ride to look at, but I think when it first opened as X No Way Out, there was a few pieces of theming inside the pyramid that would kind of light up as you went past them, but when I went on, none of that was really working, which is probably why it doesn't stick in my memory as that memorable of a ride. But obviously, with it being my first kind of big coaster I did at Thorpe, as it was a 1.4 when it went backwards, I found it thrilling enough. For younger me, who wasn't as into coasters as she was now, like, I'd grown up going to Chessington and I was a huge fan of all the rides there, but it was taking that next step up, which we'll learn a little bit more about as we progress up the list. But that is why X No Way Out sits at number 8 in my list. Next up at number 7 is Saw the Ride. I know I've put one of the big 5 coasters incredibly low on my list, but I have reason to. But let's focus on the positives first. The coaster is incredibly photogenic off-ride, especially that vertical drop under those rotating blades, which is kind of the bit of the coaster you can easily film, as a lot of it is towards the back out of the sight line on the Saw Island, and you either have to be in the queue or somehow round on Monk's Walk you might be able to get a good kind of view of it. I'm not too sure, but a lot of it is quite hidden away, especially with a large section of it being indoors, which for me is the highlight of the ride. I remember when I first went on it, I was so terrified of gore and horror and blood that I used to spend the whole indoor section with my eyes shut, and the only way I knew I was going outside is like the little barrel roll over the body as you're going outside, and that's when I would open my eyes. And then one year came, I think it was the year a couple of years before I really got into scare mazes, and I could keep my eyes open for the whole indoor section, and thank God I've finally been able to do it, as that's my favourite part of the ride. That ridiculously steep drop that you're not expecting, as you have those blades swinging across and you kind of think you're heading straight into them, and then there's just this really steep drop. For horror fans, whether you're a fan of gore or not, it's just so aesthetically pleasing, and I love going on the second car in a dispatch if I'm able to, as you get that little bonus scene with Billy the puppet where your train stops and his puppet comes forward and kind of speaks to you a bit, and then you move around to do the kind of circuit of the coaster. The negatives is how incredibly rough it's got over the years. So I think I first went on Saw in about 2013, 2014, because my first visit to Thorpe, proper visit where I started to do all the big coasters, was about 2012, and the one we didn't get to do was Saw. So when I went back a year or two later, that was the one I fully focused on getting on first, because I hadn't done it. And I remember it was so enjoyable, and it wasn't too rough, as you know, Gerstlauer has that reputation that their coasters can be a little bit of a head basher. But oh geez, the season we just had, even though it's been really short, I've visited Thorpe quite a few times, and Soar has just got rougher and rougher as my visits over the years have kind of come and gone. And then this year it's been unbearable at times, where I've come off with a really bad headache. Surprisingly, the front row seems a lot has more of a rattle than a back row of a car, which you'd expect the back to kind of take more of it, but with it just being an 8-seater, so 2 rows of 4, maybe that's something that kind of plays up. And some cars are fine, and then I think there's a few select cars that are just awful. So while it's not a terrible coaster and I still have a lot of love for it, it was the first coaster I went on that had that vertical drop, as I did this way before I did the Smiler at Alton Towers or Rage at Adventure Island or Speed at Oakwood. This was the first one where it was fully vertical. So it will always hold a special place in my heart for that, and the theming, which I just adore now. Come a long way from being terrified of it, so I'm pretty proud of myself on that front. But before I ramble on too much, I think the reason I rate it so lowly is just because with all of the elements being quite rough, it doesn't make that enjoyable experience anymore, which is sad. And hopefully it will get some TLC over the winter, and it will kind of be this mind-blowing experience when you go back and you're like, oh my god, this is so much better than last year. So I keep my fingers crossed for that, and that is why Soar comes in at number 7. Next up at number 6 is X. So we've had the first variation, X No Way Out, and just a few spaces higher is the second variation, which was X. This was the perfect family coaster that Thorpe needed to go along with Flying Fish for those younger guests that just weren't tall enough for all the 1.4s, as most of the rides at Thorpe are 1.4, so it's nice to have something else kind of in the middle that younger family members could go and enjoy, as it was I think it was a 0.9 or it was 1 meter. It was around that, or maybe 1.2. Can't remember, but this was the rave coaster by far. You were on a journey of light and sound. It was full of lasers, pounding like music you'd find in a club, so it was up there. And even though it was definitely a ride for the younger kids, and obviously it wasn't going backwards anymore, it was facing forwards, it just clicked with so many people of all different ages because of that music and the lights, and it was just a really fun experience. And that ran for quite a few years. The soundtrack changed quite a few times, and then it kind of, for the last couple of years, just had this one kind of soundtrack around the ride that just fit perfectly. It was after doing obviously X No Way Out and doing the layout forwards, I definitely preferred it forwards, and seeing everything, being blinded by the lasers going up the lift hill and around the corners. And even with all the lights inside, it still gave it that really disorientating feeling because of all the lights in your eyes, and you would be heading towards this laser and you'd kind of veer off to the right or the left, and it was just so much fun. And everyone felt so happy on that coaster because of the music. Everyone would be like clapping along or like dancing in their seats, and it was just a lovely atmosphere. And I was really sad when it was announced that X would be changing. I think a lot of us saw it coming, but yeah, it was anticipation of what would replace our beloved X, and that is soon to come. And this is why X makes number 6 on my list. Next up at number 5 is the last variation of X No Way Out /X, and that is The Walking Dead the ride. where do I start with this? Obviously we had our beloved X, which I adored, and then it was announced The Walking Dead, and I thought, great, because at this time I was still not confident with horror and gore, and I wasn't a fan of the show, so I was like, oh, am I gonna get what's going on this coaster? And I was pleasantly surprised. So the whole exterior of the pyramid had changed. It wasn't this bright colour anymore, it was the safe zone. And the first major change I remember was having the pre-show, which is really fun. There's a few little Easter eggs of people's names on the wall in that pre-show room, and a couple of my friends are on there, so when you go in, try and figure out if you can spot any of names you might recognize and comment down below if you spotted any names of people within the community or within the theme park industry. And the pre-show just sets the tone perfectly. You've got a nice little jump scare towards the back of the room. I won't go into too much detail because if you haven't visited, it hasn't obviously been open for the 2020 season, so I won't spoil it too much, so you kind of still have a few little surprises when you finally get to go and ride it, as hopefully it will be back in operation in 2021. I've really missed it this year, and I never thought I'd say that when it was first announced. You don't have to be a huge fan of The Walking Dead to enjoy the ride. It tailors for everyone's needs. The pre-show batching definitely helps kind of keep the queue moving in the actual building, and you're not queuing up the corridors for too long. Lots of different smell pods in there. And then the ride, yeah, it's a lot darker theme, so again the height restriction has changed to 1.4 due to the themes and the nature of the ride, but you're still facing forwards, and I love it. There's a lovely kind of use of lighting when you're going up the lift hill with like some lamps on the side, lots of smoke, flashing strobe kind of lights, and lots of obviously zombie mannequins. And then the initial change that had me worried when it was first announced was the use of live actors, as I hadn't done any scare mazes at the time, and I just hated the thought of my enjoyment of a roller coaster then being taken over by my fear of live actors and kind of horror and people jumping out at you. So as you exit the ride, not throughout the whole exit queue line, but the first bit, just as you walk off of the train through the doors to leave, you have a scene with some live actors. And I remember the first time I did it, there was a sign out saying there wouldn't be any actors, and I was so happy. So I enjoyed it, and then we went back round later on that day and the actors were in there, and oh god, I was absolutely petrified. But then as my love for the scare mazes grew, so did my love for having that interaction with the actors at the exit for The Walking Dead, and that quickly made me enjoy the full experience of the coaster, from the pre-show to the ride to the exit, a whole lot more. I think it's a great all-round experience. Again, for the horror lovers, it's aesthetically pleasing with all the kind of gore and horror theming around the ride, and the live actors just adds that for the people who love their scare mazes and scare zones, and interacting with live actors, it's just perfect. And while I do miss X and its catchy theme tune, I think The Walking Dead has certainly come to be justified as a great replacement. For fans of the show or not, it's great, and it's a full round experience that is enjoyable, especially the coaster hasn't changed, it's just the theming. And that is why it sits firmly at number 5 on my list. So we have finally made it to our top 4, and in at number 4 is Colossus. Now, I know this is probably a very controversial opinion for many people, as a lot of people find it rough, quite outdated, slow dispatches, but for me, Colossus holds a really, really special place in my heart, and for a very sentimental reason. When I went back to Thorpe in 2012, when I started to finally get on all the bigger coasters, Colossus was the first ride of the day. It was my first coaster with inversions, my first big coaster at Thorpe, so it really holds a special place in my heart. Yeah, in the past few years I've preferred Soar over Colossus because I just found Colossus so rough, and while it didn't take away my love for the coaster, I certainly wasn't enjoying it as much as I had done previously. And then the 2020 season came around, and as you can tell by this list, has completely flipped it, and I now rate Colossus so much more than I do the likes of Soar. Purely because the rides I've had on Colossus this season haven't seemed rough at all. I've been sat near the back of the train, near the front of the train, in the middle of the train, and it's been fine. I haven't really had any real head bashing moments on the coaster. For me, as you may remember from my Alton Towers video, I love coasters on the front row. I love coasters anywhere, but I generally love to sit on the front row of a coaster, and Colossus is no exception. I adore the front row on Colossus. I think it's the best place to sit, especially when you've got the spirals towards the end of the ride and you're just staring down and they seem never ending. It's just incredible. It's one of my favourite feelings, and me and Owen, on our last visit to Thorpe on Halloween, we were lucky enough to get a front row ride in the dark on Colossus, and we absolutely adored it. We loved it so much. We had so much fun. It wasn't rough. It was just a really enjoyable experience. Again, Colossus is quite old. The only real problem I have with it is the overhead restraints when they're quite chunky at the bottom, so they can really push down on your thighs, which can be a little bit painful, and there's not really much room to move your legs when you're sat down on the coaster, but that doesn't really take away from the experience for me. Sometimes it can be a little bit uncomfortable if you haven't got your feet in like a comfortable position when you've pulled the restraint down, but apart from that, I don't really have any issues with the overall feel of the coaster or the designs. Obviously, we'd love Colossus to have new trains and lap bars, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think maybe they just need to give some TLC to the ride and also to the trains that they can run, and it will be running back to its former glory. But I personally don't really have any problem with it, which is why it comes in at number 4. So in at number 3 is Nemesis Inferno. A lot of you who watch this may know that there is this ongoing debate whether you are team Nemesis at Alton Towers, which is the original, or team Nemesis Inferno at Thorpe Park, or as some people like to call it, Nemesis Inferior. Anyway, I would have to say I am team Nemesis Inferno. I think that coaster has aged so incredibly well. When I first went on it, I found it quite underwhelming, as many people do. It didn't feel very forceful. It was quick and it hit the elements of the coaster really well, but there was just no real intensity to the ride, and I found that quite disappointing. And that was back in 2012, so that was what, 8 years ago? And in those 8 years, boy oh boy, have I seen a massive improvement. Especially one of my last rides of the 2020 season, it was incredibly intense. That loop as you are on the front and back row is just incredible. It's so intense, you can feel the G's on your head. Like, I was taken quite aback actually, because although I'd kind of seen an improvement in the intensity. I still hadn't had it quite that intense on Inferno, and I was just so taken aback, and I just adore it. I love the theming, that you're inside this volcano and it's themed around like lava and fire, and the soundtrack is incredible for the ride. It always has been, and I just absolutely adore the whole kind of theme of the coaster as well. I remember certainly this year they haven't run the mist in your pre-lift hill section, where you kind of dip down out of the station, you're going through the volcano, and it's still got all the lighting, but it doesn't have any of the misty smoke effects that it has done in previous years. And so hopefully that's something that we will see return in 2021, as I feel like it adds to the experience. Not too much, but just that slight little improvement to your experience is the smoke and low kind of visual sense of where you're going, as that bit in the volcano does kind of twist a little bit, which is really nice. And then you hit the lift hill and go into the main section of the coaster, which is amazing. I love it. It's improved so much. As you may remember from my Alton Towers video, I like Nemesis, but I find it too intense at times, whereas Nemesis Inferno now just sits in that kind of perfect area of intensity for me, while still making it a really enjoyable ride. Of course, I still love Nemesis, and I always will do, but I just prefer Inferno. It's a fantastic night ride on either the front or the back row, or anywhere essentially on that coaster is incredible, and I will certainly miss it a lot during this close season, and I hope to see even more improvements with the intensity in the 2021 season, as it has improved so much over the past 8 years since I first went on it. And long may that continue, and that is why it sits at number 3. So we have finally come to our top 2, and just missing out on the number 1 spot in second place is the Swarm. I was there on the Swarm's opening day back in 2012, and I remember specifically queuing 2.5 hours for this coaster, because it broke down on the lift hill for a good hour and 40 minutes, and we'd got through most of the queue and we were near the batching area, and then it broke down, and instead of leaving the queue we waited it out. I was with my cousins, and it didn't disappoint. Again, it was the third, I think it was the second or the third coaster we'd done at Thorpe Park that day, which was in 2012, obviously my first proper visit, and there was this huge hype around this new ride, with it being the UK's first and only winged coaster, and it's an incredible experience from start to finish. The storytelling, the advert really drew in my attention, these people being picked up by this sort of bug in the TV advert, and then to see it in real life with all the fantastic theming around the Swarm Island. You've got the likes of the ambulance, the burnt out church, which is the station, the helicopter, the huge plane, and the plane when you go under, all those near misses. Of course, another huge element you have on the Swarm is the fire engine. And I remember when it opened, I think it was like every 3 trains that went past, it would have this huge fire effect come up from the fire engine. Sadly, that hasn't run for the past couple of years that I personally remember seeing it. And again, I hope that's something else that we will get back in 2021, as it just adds a little bit extra to that experience when you're on and off the coaster, and it makes it so photogenic as well, especially if you catch it at the right moment with the fire. And then the ad, of course, of the billboard, which added another element of a near miss on the coaster, which is just incredible. It's so well paced. I love the kind of uniqueness of that inversion at the top of the lift hill before you've even gone down the drop. It's just amazing. Obviously, with it being a wing coaster, you can choose whether to sit on the left hand side or the right hand side, and due to unpopular opinion, a lot of people like to go on the left side. I actually prefer the right because I love the feeling of going over that first inversion at the top of the lift hill rather than going under the track. I just adore it. It's so smooth, keeps up the pace. It's still got some intensity to it, but I know because it's quite smooth, a lot of people can genuinely find it quite boring because of how smooth it is, but I don't really think it's a boring coaster at all. I think it's incredible. It's a really special experience to have in the UK, with it being the UK's only winged roller coaster, and the theming of the end of the world is incredible. And I just remember all the in the queue, like the news reports that we were watching for this 2.5 hours, and it really built up that anticipation to get on the coaster, and we loved it. We really enjoyed it, and I've never looked back since. It is always sat firmly in that second spot no matter what, for the past 8 years since I first went on the coaster. Improvements, I wouldn't really improve anything. Obviously this year in 2020 when we went to Fright Nights, the island had a scare zone on it, which was the swarm invasion, and that definitely added to the atmosphere of the island. Instead of just kind of walking across to the coaster, you had the interaction with the actors as well, which is really good and kind of added a little bit more to the backstory, like it did back in 2012 when there was actors running around to promote the ride when it opened. And it was just a it's a really special coaster, and again, front row for the views is just incredible. I wouldn't change a second of that coaster. I wouldn't change any elements that it has. It's just a real firm favourite, and definitely when the younger thrill seekers start to reach those 1.4s where they can go on the bigger coasters, the Swarm is the perfect one to start them off with, purely because of how smooth it is, and it picks up the pace really well, and it's got that perfect balance of enjoyment and also the thrill, and that is why it's at number 2. Of course, that means my favourite roller coaster at Thorpe Park is the gorgeous, beautiful, holy, elite coaster that is Stealth. I adore that thing so much. Considering it was the one I was the most afraid of when I first went in 2012, and me and my cousin decided, right, we're going to do it. And the anticipation when you're watching those lights, waiting for them to turn green with the audio, it just builds up so much adrenaline, and I don't even care that the ride is over so quickly, because it gives me everything I look for in a coaster. I love the launch. It's so forceful and it's so quick. Obviously it's like 80 miles an hour in now under 2 seconds, and you really feel that punch as you move, and oh my god, I love it so much. It's the height of it is just something incredible. The views, even though you only get them for literally a split second, they're amazing over the whole resort, looking down into Rainbow Rapids and over Nemesis Inferno's volcano. It's just like this feeling of euphoria and complete happiness. Like, that coaster is my happy place. That coaster is my happy coaster at Thorpe. Whenever I'm around it, even if I'm just sat underneath its top hat watching to like film or take photos, I am just the happiest when I'm around Stealth at Thorpe Park. It's crazy that a coaster can give you so much happiness, and it sounds really weird to loads of people. Even my mum and dad think, oh my god, you're just a weirdo, but it's a hobby, and that coaster for me solidified my realization of you don't just enjoy theme parks when on the off chance you go. This is like a hobby you want to pursue, and Stealth definitely made me realise that. So quick recap, it's quick, the height of it, it's forceful, you get a really nice little pop of airtime as you leave the top hat and you go over a small bunny hill into the breaks. Like, I just love it. The music around the area, playing all these really old, like Elvis Presley's on there, you've got some of the Beach Boys, like all these songs playing in the area, creating this huge atmosphere around the speedway. It's just, I love it. Obviously for Fright Nights you also have the Amity High vampires in the area, which again adds so much. As you're walking to and from the coaster, you get all this amazing interaction with the actors, which leads me on to my favourite moment is a front row ride on Stealth in the dark, staring down that launch track with the lights beaming down on you, being blinded by the camera flash, just staring up the launch track and thinking, oh my god, I can't wait. It's the best feeling ever. I love that coaster so much. I know I keep saying it, but I just can't get over how much I love this coaster. Again, sometimes if you're really lucky, you get a unique experience on there. Sometimes the ride operator will turn off the audio and turn off the lights and you're just sat there in complete silence, and sometimes they'll just tap the microphone to make like a heartbeat sound, and then you launch without any lights or audio, and that's just a really special experience. If you ever get to experience that on Stealth, it's an amazing ride, and that is why it sits firmly at number one. I don't think it will ever be knocked off by another ride. It would have to be a really special coaster to knock Stealth off the top spot for me at Thorpe Park, and that is why Stealth is number one. And so that was the ranking of the Thorpe Park roller coasters. I do hope you enjoyed the video and I didn't ramble on too much, especially when it came to Stealth, as I obviously cannot contain my excitement for that coaster, and I don't know what I'm going to do until March comes back round when I can go back on it. Please do like and subscribe if you would like to see more, and let me know in the comments section below what your favourite coaster is at Thorpe Park, what other parks you would like me to rank the coasters of, or I will try and come up with something else, or any other video ideas you have. Please do let me know in the comments below. I have been Lou, and I will see you guys in the next video very soon. Bye!